we have to take advantage of having growth to actually produce a different type of economy. And that different type of economy is basically going to evolve around industrialization. And so the next question is, how are you going to fund that? How is going to finance, this transformation? And that's what this forum is about, is to demonstrate that you are going to finance it first and foremost with internal resources.
The 9th ADF Forum took place this year in Marrakesh, Morocco. The Economic Commission for Africa's flagship event had a focus on innovative financing and the transformation of the continent through these very means. A plethora of attendees from across Africa were present in Marrakesh, from the high-level delegates from the Moroccan government, the Executive Secretary of the Economic Commission for Africa, Dr. Carlos Lopez, and the presidents of Senegal, Ivory Coast, and the Prime Minister of Cape Verde. The forum specifically sought to explore new and innovative ways of accruing financing on the continent and had a focus on the following key thematic areas: domestic resource mobilization, illicit financial flows, private equity, new forms of partnership, and climate financing. One of the principal themes of this year's forum, the targeting of illicit financial flows, is of primary concern, as the revelation that as much as 50 to 60 billion US dollars is leaving Africa annually means this is having a direct impact on the transformation of the continent and, more importantly, the resources available for further development. The sessions aim to find funding solutions and common ground for financing structures away from the traditional donor-led economy paradigms. Discussions were frank and robust and sought to encourage delegates to share analysis on what financing initiatives are now suffering fatigue and to engage on new modalities to protect income and raise revenues internally on the continent.
So private equity in Africa has grown tremendously over the past decade plus. Indeed, now we're seeing about 70 plus GPs that are looking for capital from the private equity market presently, and this has grown from maybe about 10 or less names 10 years ago. So it's a very exciting thing. What it really means is that we're developing an ecosystem around private equity where, different general partners can look at opportunities together, where there's a more buoyant exit environment as well, and just better opportunity for transparency and regulation, and makes it more attractive for investors around the world. So the culture of private equity, it's very important that government and policymakers get behind the private equity story. As you probably know, for young businesses, for family-owned businesses, it's very hard to get capital on the continent. The banks, if they're lending at all, is at astronomical rates. So very important that they have additional channels of capital, and that's where private equity can really step in. And not only from a capital perspective, but really from a value creation perspective as well, and actually assist entrepreneurs and management teams in developing their companies to global standards to help them grow. So with regards to what we can do to ensure that we get to that point, we need to attract local capital to the story. The more you can attract local capital to the local story, the more the international audience is going to take notice. And that's already started to happen a great deal. But I personally think that we can all do a lot more to attract that local capital. The pension industry, for example, has grown exponentially over the last several years. Nigeria, for example, went from close to zero in private equity assets to about 25 billion over the past 10 plus years. So that's very important. And if you think about what is underlying those funds, it is folks like you and I who have pensions with local managers. For some people, it could be their very first foray into the investment world, and it's important for them to understand where their money is going and what it's doing. And that creates a bigger story, a better story for the global private equity audience as well.
I think it's important to underscore the fact that investment is risky. So when anyone is taking an investment, it's on the understanding that they'll be able to get a return out of the particular investment, or there's a likelihood also that that return might not be there. But given the growth rate in Africa, what we have seen and experienced is that we don't want to end up with a large middle income economy who are basically consumers. We need to make investments because the need for these particular investments will be there given the growth rate of the African population. So in terms of return, it's something that you don't need to worry. I mean, Africa has had people coming in since 1890s, setting up. I mean, if we didn't have any resources to talk about investment in Africa, we should have stopped doing this 100 years ago. So we don't need to give an investor an assurance that, listen, this is good, you'll be able to get your money back. If people have been doing business in Africa for the last 100 years and they're still doing it now, it means that there is an opportunity for them to be able to get a return.
Basically what it does is that it's investors that come in and take ownership in businesses. And they provide skills and knowledge in addition to capital, in addition to investment or funds to help expand the business. And I'm going to talk more about the SMEs. Many of our SMEs stay small because they're driven by families, by entrepreneurs, and they may not have the ability to grow the business because they're focused very much on what the business does in terms of the operations, but they may not have the capacity to grow the business. And so we're missing out on an opportunity to do that. So your private investor will come in, take some ownership, and help them grow the business. And so I think it's a very important tool to build capacity of these SMEs, to create jobs, and to support economic growth on the continent. Is very welcome. I think that there are many aspects to innovative financing for growth on the continent, and private equity is one. Private equity will invest in businesses that exist. They're not going to create the businesses, they will invest in the businesses. But there are many other things that can happen. Banks need to be more innovative. We need to also look at how to expand financial access to people by providing them with bank accounts, but not only that, the ability to send money, the ability to save, as well as to borrow. And when I talk about people in Africa having a bank account, I'm talking about the bottom of the pyramid, because there is a lot of money that's circulating at the bottom of the pyramid that we're not capturing in the economy. And I think by building a more financially inclusive financial sector, we will capture those funds that can then be reinvested into the businesses. So private equity is a tool among others, and I think I'm very happy to see that this has come to the forefront of discussion at UNECA, that it has come to the forefront of discussion with the policymakers on what is private equity, how do we build this asset class, how do we regulate this asset class, how do we capture more domestic savings as a source of investment into this asset class.
The Africa Social Development Index is a tool that has been developed based on a request made by a conference of ministers for an African-specific indicator to measure exclusion on the continent. I think that when we talk about innovative financing or even investment, we talk a lot about investments in industry and infrastructure without thinking about investments in human beings, investments in health, investments in education, even in employment generating growth. I've just come out of a session on pension funds, tapping Africa's unused wealth. And it was all about private equity. So the question I was asking in that session was that yesterday we presented the African Social Development Index. How do pension funds go to invest in some of these areas, so that people have better lives? Housing, health, education, etc. These are legitimate areas for investment, and they have a direct impact on people's well-being and livelihood.
Well, there are many, depending on which dimension you want to look at. The challenges around taxation, tax administration is very weak in Africa, but also they have to deal with extremely well-resourced multinational corporations, which have departments that specialize in tax evasion, in tax avoidance, and more recently you see also a tendency to move profits around and assign them to subsidiaries where the tax regimes are very low. Now, that's not a problem of Africa alone. It's a problem that even the advanced nations face. And then there are challenges around illicit, leakages, transfer pricing, over-invoicing and under-invoicing. And then you also have the historical problem of capital flight because of perceptions of risk, perceptions of political instability, and just not enough institutions that can regulate all these things. So all these challenges are there. I'm not saying that it's all gloom. Okay, I think there has been considerable progress. There's been investments by institutions such as the African Development Bank to build, tax administration institutions, and the financial services industry in Africa continue to improve, continue to provide products and services that are responsive to the small and medium enterprises, the informal sector. I think Equity Bank in Kenya is a typical example of the new energy and the momentum around financial intermediation and financial products and services and going forward. So yes, there are challenges, but I think progress has been made and there remain tremendous opportunities for domestic resource mobilization.
Specifically speaking for Transparency International, one of the tools that we have from the business sector side is dedicated to companies. So for a few years we've been looking at over 105 of the biggest multinational companies, and we're looking at their reporting practices. So we see from the publicly available information of these companies what they are doing and what they are reporting on anti-corruption, what they're doing and what they are reporting on a country-by-country basis. So it's not just their corporate reporting as a group of companies, but also on a country-by-country basis. And through that, we can also then make recommendations and see what touches most on the anti-corruption agenda, the illicit financial flows is, are they reporting profits where they make them? And that question is important because in terms of illicit financial flows, one of the practices is to report, to inverse the reporting. Some companies do report their profits where they feel they need to report them, where they feel they want to report them, and not necessarily where they make the profit. And that robs that country of its profits, that in terms of taxes, in terms of tax revenue. I think, as discussed, I think that point was touched upon by some of my colleagues on the panel. A lot of what is called illicit financial flows, as the chair put it, belongs to about 60% of it belongs to commerce, regular commerce, that is not illegal, that is not, it's not criminal. The criminal transactions and trafficking, and it belongs to about 35%, and then the bribery to 5%. So these 60% is using loopholes, is using regular weaknesses in institutions, weaknesses in the tax regulation frameworks of the countries, weaknesses in the laws, weaknesses in their judiciary systems, and in ways that they are able to get sometimes, or to be very specific, holidays, tax holidays. I think we have found governments welcoming, in terms of welcoming civil society organizations to work with them for the most part. And that is encouraged. That is extremely useful. Governments and states do not always have all the relevant capacities. Civil society organizations can come on board with research capacities, advocacy capacities, and that can help with supporting and complementing the agenda, even as developed by the governments. Sometimes this has not been the case. Sometimes there's been a bit of reluctance, and that needs to be clarified, because the truth is this issue is so complex that we'll need all the actors on board to be able to make anything out of it.
I think you're right, and this is not only something peculiar to the African legal structures. This also happens in the developed world, in the United States, in Europe. I think the most important is always to be quite conversant with not only the bold letters of your legal system, but also with the fine letters. There's so many ambivalence to the definition of a legal code. There's so many interpretations that will be given at the national and the international level. The most important thing is to harmonize, these legal writings thoroughly. The judiciary, the legislative, everybody should be very much aware of it. And sometimes you would find legal procedures that are written by companies, invariably most countries simply ingest it because it came from some legal expertise. I think the solution to it is to read it very carefully, to see if it fits the context of your country, the concerns of your people. Certain legal procedures are quite wide in their coverings. What we have to do is to see if it's tailored to the particularities of your country, and also that rhymes with the international legal systems.